Vikings conquered the North Atlantic in open wooden boats with zero fire. No hearth, no brazier, not even a bucket of coals. In conditions that would kill you in hours, they survived for weeks using a secret so brilliant it will shatter everything you think you know about Viking technology. Winter, 1000 Common Era. The North Atlantic. A single wooden longship, a fragile collection of overlapping planks, scales a wave the size of a mountain. The wind is a razor, a high-pitched scream that never stops, day or night. Ice encases the rigging, adding tons of weight to the groaning mast, threatening to capsize the vessel with every swell. The breath of the crew crystallizes in the Arctic air, each man's face a mask of frozen spray. They are surrounded by an enemy that has no army, needs no cannons, and offers no mercy. This is the White Death, an elemental, patient killer. For weeks at sea, these crews are exposed to conditions that would kill a modern person in hours. The cold is an animal, a presence that crawls into their clothes and under their skin. It's a physical weight. Frostbite is a constant terror, turning fingers and toes black and numb. The sheer noise of the wind and the crashing waves is a form of psychological torture, a relentless assault that denies sleep or rest. They have no cabin, no shelter, no walls to stand between them and the killing cold. And in this open, wooden shell, this fragile basket of wood tossed on an endless, churning black ocean, the crew has that shocking secret. They have no fire. But here's what's truly shocking. This wasn't primitive ignorance. It was calculated, revolutionary engineering. And their first weapon against the ice was something they could wear on their skin. They forged a living, breathing armor using wool so advanced it could retain 80% of its insulating properties even when soaking wet. This was Vadmal, the product of 1,000 years of selective breeding, processed into dense, heavy, incredibly durable cloth. The inner layers trapped body heat and wicked moisture away from the skin. The outer layers, rich in natural lanolin, caused spray and rain to bead up and roll off like a modern synthetic jacket. So how did they survive voyages across the most treacherous, unforgiving waters on Earth without fire? The answer begins with a fundamental, terrifying maritime reality. Fire and wooden ships are mortal enemies. When you are sailing in a vessel made entirely of pine, oak, and tarred rope, a single spark doesn't just risk warmth, it risks everything. The very construction of a Viking longship, the design that made it so fast and flexible, also made it a tinderbox. They used a clinker-built design where thin, overlapping planks were riveted together and sealed with tar. The gaps were stuffed with animal hair and wool, both soaked in pitch. The rigging, the hundreds of feet of rope that controlled the sail, was waterproofed with pine tar. And the sail itself, a massive sheet of densely woven wool treated with animal fat to make it water-resistant, was essentially a massive torch waiting for ignition, ready to go up in a pillar of flame at the slightest touch of an ember. But the real secret wasn't about staying warm, it was about something much more clever. The completely open design of these ships meant there were no bulkheads to stop a fire from spreading, no fire breaks. There was no way to contain a blaze. Maritime archaeology studies indicate that a fire, once started in these conditions, could consume an entire vessel in under 4 minutes. 4 minutes. 4 minutes in the middle of a freezing ocean, with the wind fanning the flames into an inferno. 4 minutes between a single stray ember and total annihilation. For the Vikings, a fire at sea was not a risk, it was suicide. They were trapped. Caught between the slow, silent death of the ice and the explosive, 4-minute death of the flame. And yet, this is the very civilization that would conquer nations, establish trade routes from Greenland to Constantinople, and discover continents. How did they survive a choice between two forms of annihilation? To understand how the Vikings defeated the cold, you must first understand a mystery buried in the mud. For 1,000 years, their greatest ships lay hidden, waiting to tell their story. They were time capsules, preserved in the low-oxygen environments of fjords and burial mounds. But when archaeologists pulled them from the depths, what they didn't find would rewrite history. The most complete evidence emerges from Roskilde Fjord in Denmark, where 5 Viking vessels lay hidden for nearly a millennium. These ships are a perfect cross-section of their maritime world. a mighty warship built for speed and warriors, a heavy cargo ship built for the open ocean, smaller fishing and transport boats. Teams recovered thousands of artifacts, water barrels, tool chests, ballast stones, even traces of preserved food. But here's the shocking part archaeologists found. Across all 5 vessels, representing every different ship type and function, they found not a single heating device, no brazier, no hearth, nothing. This shocking absence echoes across every major Viking ship discovery. The famous Oseberg burial vessel from 834 Common Era was interred with tapestries, elaborately carved beds, sledges, and a chariot. The excavation did find elaborate cooking vessels, cauldrons, and kitchen tools, but the hope for an easy answer vanished under scrutiny. These items were pristine. They showed no charring, no soot, no sign of wear from use at sea. They were burial goods, items packed for the afterlife. The ship itself had no built-in, fireproof place for a fire. Even the recent excavations using ground-penetrating radar and modern digital scanning techniques confirmed what the older digs had already told us. There was no cooking or heating apparatus. The Vikings' own histories, the sagas, confirm this physical pattern. Norwegian legal texts mandated 3 daily shore trips for a ship's cook. 1 trip was for water collection, and 2 were for meal preparation. The law itself, the very framework of their society, assumed that cooking was a job done on land. The entire logistical infrastructure of sailing was built around this fact. The evidence is absolute. The case is closed. They had nothing. If you find this hidden history as fascinating as we do, make sure you subscribe to our channel. We dive into stories that shatter old myths every week. This wasn't primitive ignorance, a failure of technology. This was a deliberate, calculated, and brutal choice. But a choice for what? But this human furnace needed one more ingredient most people never think about. While the nobles of Europe built castles of stone, the Vikings forged their wool technology into a complete system. Archaeological textile evidence from Greenlandic sites reveals clothing systems of astonishing sophistication. This was not just a matter of piling on furs, a common mistake. Heavy fur, when soaked in salt water, becomes a death sentence, a heavy, frozen board that pulls a man overboard and drags him to the bottom. The Vikings knew this. They mastered different grades of wool for different functions. This wool had a critical advantage over cotton and even many modern materials. It could retain up to 80% of its insulating properties even when soaking wet. In the North Atlantic, where a man was constantly drenched in freezing spray, this was the difference between life and death, and this is where it gets truly genius. The most remarkable discovery comes from preserved clothing finds and saga descriptions. Vikings practiced a daily ritual for maximum heat retention. Women on the crew would use bone needles and wax thread to seal the men's sleeves tight at the wrists each morning. Not tied, not buttoned, sewn shut. This created an airtight seal, preventing precious body heat from escaping through the cuffs, one of the body's key areas of heat loss. It was a daily act of war against the cold, a meticulous preparation for the battle ahead. Before combat or landing, warriors would take their knives and cut the threads, a symbolic and practical act of transforming from a survivor, sealed against the elements, into a soldier, free to fight. This living armor was a complete system. They wore sealskin outer layers, a material that is both waterproof and windproof. They had fur-lined clothing made from wolf and bear pelts for the bitterest cold. This personal fortress against the elements was brilliant. It could keep a man alive on watch, hauling a rope in a freezing spray. It was the pragmatic, technological answer to the cold. But it could not defeat the long, killing hours of the night when the body is still and the cold seeps in. For that, they needed something more. They needed to abandon the individual and become a collective. The Vikings' final innovation was not a weapon or a piece of armor. It was an idea, a brilliant piece of social engineering. An idea that would transform a crew of individuals into a single, living furnace, capable of generating its own warmth in the heart of the ice. Forget Hollywood's image of Vikings wrapped in individual furs, stoically enduring the cold. The reality was far more intimate and effective. Vikings used communal sleeping systems, documented in multiple saga sources. They used shared sleeping arrangements in what the sagas call waterproof skin bags. These were, in essence, two-person sleeping bags made of sheepskin with the fur lining turned inward. They were designed not for privacy, a modern luxury, but for raw survival. Two bodies in an insulated space generate compound heat. These bags could maintain internal temperatures 15 to 20 degrees warmer than the outside air, using only the body heat of their occupants. This was their human hearth. This system was more than just practical, it was psychological. It was an enforced system of trust and cooperation, and it was even more ingenious, a perfect piece of thermal efficiency. Crews were assigned sleeping partners based on watch schedules. When one sailor stood watch for hours in the freezing cold, his partner's body heat kept the shared space warm. When they switched, the exhausted, frozen man would strip off his wet outer layers and climb into an already warm environment. The sleeping area never cooled completely. This hot bunking was a massive psychological and physical boost, a small mercy in a merciless world. This social engineering was visible in the ship's layout. Reconstructions indicate crews slept between the rowing benches, on platforms created from their stored oars, which kept them above the coldest air and the icy bilge water sloshing in the bottom of the boat. When the massive wool sail was lowered at night, it was draped over the masts to become a massive tent over the entire vessel, trapping the collective warm air radiating from dozens of bodies. But this human hearth required enormous fuel. Maintaining body heat in such conditions demanded thousands of calories per day from food that couldn't be cooked. So, the Vikings became masters of preserved, high-energy provisions. Archaeological digs at trading posts have revealed their preparation techniques. Vast quantities of dried fish, like wind, dried cod or stockfish, which remained edible for months and was pure. Transportable protein. They had ship's biscuits, a hard, dense nut bread that wouldn't spoil in the salt spray. They had fermented dairy products, like scar, and heavily salted preserved butter. And they had a cold porridge system. This was prepared in massive quantities before departure, mixing oats or barley with butter and salt for preservation. This mixture would congeal into a nutrient-dense paste that could be eaten directly or mixed with cold water. It was a caloric bomb, supplying the 2,000 to 3,000 calories per day, essential for survival. This level of strategic planning is incredible. What part of this survival system do you find the most ingenious? Let us know in the comments below. This entire system, the wool, the sleeping bags, the food relied on one more hidden piece of infrastructure. The Vikings weren't actually at sea continuously. Recent coastal surveys have uncovered extensive harbor networks, over 200 documented sites from Norway to Newfoundland. Research has revealed what these bases actually were: massive winter camps, heating stations, spanning over 55 hectares. These were not just campsites, they were logistical hubs. This was where the smell of wood smoke filled the air, where blacksmiths repaired tools and weapons, where wives and families lived, and where real, hot food was cooked in great iron cauldrons. This was the home base, the logistical anchor that made the fireless voyages possible. They had the technology for heat, they just deliberately and brilliantly chose to leave it on the shore. They had created a perfect system. An armor of wool and a hearth of human cooperation, all fueled by a cold, high-energy diet and supported by a network of supply bases. But why? Why embrace this brutal, calculated discomfort when other cultures were sailing with warm stoves? The answer was not about survival, it was about conquest. The Vikings didn't conquer the North Atlantic despite their lack of fire. They conquered it because they rejected it. This was not a weakness. It was their single greatest strategic advantage, a calculated trade-off that would let them redraw the map of the world. While Vikings sailed without fire, Mediterranean cultures had developed onboard cooking systems by 600 Common Era. Roman naval archaeology has revealed ships with bronze braziers and specialized charcoal stoves, often set in a sand-filled box to contain the heat. Byzantine vessels included dedicated galley areas with chimney systems and proper ventilation. But these solutions worked for them. They sailed in the calmer Mediterranean, and their ships were built differently, with thicker hulls and enclosed spaces. For the Vikings, in the violent North Atlantic, in their open, flexible, clinker-built ships, such a system would have been a death sentence. The Vikings made a calculated trade-off. By eliminating all heating equipment, the hearth, the chimney, the fireproofing, the heavy fuel, they saved precious cargo capacity. More importantly, they achieved superior speed. A ship without a heavy, fire-proofed hearth was lighter, faster, and more agile. It could catch favorable winds better. It could be rowed faster. This is what gave them their terrifying advantage. It meant they could appear on a coastline without warning, strike, and be gone before a local defense could ever be mustered. The lack of fire also meant a lack of smoke, making them stealthier, harder to spot on the horizon. This speed and cargo space meant they could carry more warriors, more trade goods, or more plunder. This choice, the choice to endure the cold, is what funded their expansion. In 2007, modern experimental archaeology confirmed this entire system works. The crew of an authentic 30-meter-long reconstruction sailed from Denmark to Ireland and back. For weeks, they lived as the Vikings did. The modern crew reported that the cold was all-consuming, a psychological battle, but the system worked. The layered wool, the communal sleeping bags, the watch schedules, it all functioned exactly as the sagas described. The crew survived, but the physical systems required psychological support. Excavations from Viking camps have found hundreds of gaming pieces, dice and board games. These weren't mere entertainment. They were deliberate psychological strategies. In the endless, crushing, cold darkness of a North Atlantic night, these games and the telling of epic sagas were how they kept their minds sharp, how they reinforced social bonds, and how they kept from going mad. It was mental survival. It's a story of strategic brilliance that deserves to be told. If you learn something new, share this video with someone who thinks they know the Vikings. The Vikings conquered the North Atlantic not with brute endurance, but with systematic, strategic brilliance. This is the choice that allowed them to found Dublin, serve as the elite guard in Constantinople, and be the first Europeans to build a settlement in North America, 500 years before Columbus. They achieved it all in open boats, deliberately choosing to sail without fire. So next time you reach for your car heater, remember, Vikings chose strategic brilliance over comfort and conquered half the world because of it. What other primitive civilizations were actually technological geniuses? Let me know in the comments below. If you want to see more stories that challenge what you know about history, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel.